Hello, my name's Chris Mannell from Christchurch, Ilkley, where I'm a lay preacher. I'd like to share with you a reflection on our Gospel reading from the 5th Sunday in Lent on John chapter 12, verses 20 to 33. Some Greeks want to meet Jesus and approach one of the disciples, Philip, who, though a Jew, had a Greek name. Philip in turn goes to Andrew, who was the other of the 12 with a Greek name. Perhaps Philip felt the need for moral support. A bit like that, sharing our faith today often works as a chain reaction. Through sharing good news with a friend and family member, then other people can experience the life-changing love of God and feel compelled to share it in turn with others. When Philip and Andrew told Jesus that the Greeks wanted to see him, it prompted him to say, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." Up to this point in John's Gospel, Jesus is quoted as saying, "My hour has not yet come." So here we see a turning point. His hour has indeed come. His ministry in the Galilee is over, and Jesus finds himself in Jerusalem in the final week of his earthly life. He knows that suffering and death lie ahead. This passage in John's Gospel is found immediately after the account of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem that we celebrate on Palm Sunday, and John puts it in place of the story of Jesus driving the money changers out of the temple. Perhaps this is significant. Temple worship in Jesus' time was restrictive, with only the Jews allowed into the inner courts. People like the Greeks we've heard about would be restricted to the outer courts, which were smelly, noisy places. Some commentators suggest that by replacing the cleansing of the temple with this story, where Greeks seek Jesus, John is asserting that Jesus came for everybody. Judaism has lost its way in temple worship and couldn't merely be restored by driving out the money changers. The time has come for a new way of relating to God through Jesus. Jesus tells his disciples that a seed must perish if a plant is to grow and bear fruit. For John, the grain falling to the ground and dying leads to new life and a harvest. In Lent, we remember that without Good Friday, there can be no Easter Sunday. The path of sacrifice that Jesus describes later provides a pattern for his disciples to follow in their own ministries and for people who've followed in generations since. In the parallel passages in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus lists some of the things in this life that mustn't be given priority over loving God. These include loving parents, siblings, spouse, children, or indeed life itself. However important these relationships might be for us, there is always the invitation to a deeper relationship through a life of faith. And in our final death, there's the call to everlasting life. Jesus calls us to die to ourselves so that, contrary to worldly wisdom, we can bear fruit in new and surprising ways. The challenge of this passage reminds me of the hard words that we often share in our church on Covenant Sunday at the beginning of each new year. The Methodist Church website notes that in our culture we tend to prize our ability to make decisions and choose our own path in life. It can feel very hard to give that up. But the covenant prayer is like a love poem. It's about each of us surrendering to God in love and justice. However, this sacrifice isn't futile. We're reassured that all those who follow Jesus will have a place with him in his future glory and be honoured by God. Jesus is troubled by what lies ahead, suffering and death. Our passage replaced the account found in the other Gospels of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane prior to his arrest. As somebody who was fully human, Jesus had a sense of foreboding and asks to be spared the suffering that awaits him. However, to Jesus, glorifying God means more to him than life itself, so he immediately surrenders to his mission, to glorify God through what must follow. His private agony is transformed to a public confession of his obedience to the Father's will. Then we hear a voice from heaven answers Jesus' prayer, but the people heard it as thunder or the sound of angels speaking to him. We learn that this voice is for the benefit of the crowd, to show that Jesus, the Son of Man, is the light of the world present among them, and is to help them to understand the significance of what is unfolding. The death of Jesus, which is to follow, will mark the judgment of the world. It isn't just the history of a brave man being put to death. Rather, these events impact the destiny of each one of us before God. Christians, those of faith and those of none. He was to die for people from all ethnic backgrounds, to draw them to him and so lead them to eternal life. The Greeks who were attracted by Judaism would have found themselves restricted to the outer courts of the temple. Even devout Jews were excluded from the Holy of Holies, where God was believed to dwell. Through his death, Jesus marks a new, more intimate relationship between God and humankind. Jews, Greeks, and indeed all people will be equally welcome, no longer separated by creed or colour. Those of us who worship in churches are delighted to welcome others to share in our ways. But too often the inner courts of our churches seem rather empty, and many of those who admire Jesus' life and respect his teaching seem content to remain in the outer courts of the world. If we are to be part of Jesus' mission to draw all people to him, we must consider what we must free ourselves from to help them to draw near. To do so, we must listen to each other and to God, and then follow wherever Christ might lead, irrespective of the cost, and so get caught up in the glory of God and of his love. Thank you for listening to this short reflection. May you go in peace. Thanks.